What's the lowest amount you need to let compounding work? In other words, what's the smallest pile of money you could invest today, walk away from, never add to again, and still retire comfortably decades from now? It's a question almost everyone wonders about, but very few people actually break it down with real numbers, because once you run the math, the answer is both surprisingly achievable for many people and eye-opening for everyone else. Most assume you need to start with huge sums, like 6 figures or more. Others assume the market will magically carry them even if they start late. But the truth sits somewhere between those extremes. If you give compounding enough time, it does most of the heavy lifting for you, as long as you plant the seed early. To figure out the lowest amount you'd need today, you first have to understand how much you'll need later. That means looking at real retirement spending, realistic withdrawal rates, and a grounded long-term return assumption. Not doomsday pessimism, not pie-in-the-sky optimism. Once you know your end target, the math becomes incredibly clear. Before we uncover the numbers, go ahead and hit the like button so the video can get pushed to more people, and subscribe to the channel so you can see more videos like this. Let's start with a basic but crucial question. How much does the average retired household actually spend each year? $100,000? $150,000? $75,000? The number is actually surprising. Across multiple sources, the number consistently lands around $60,000 per year. Not luxury, not poverty, just a normal, comfortable retirement, covering housing, healthcare, groceries, transportation, and some leisure spending. To generate that income reliably, you need a safe withdrawal rate. People debate whether 4% is still the baseline or whether a number closer to 5% is better to use. But to keep things conservative, and because most people naturally prefer caution with retirement, we'll use the classic 4% withdrawal rate. At a 4% withdrawal rate, producing $60,000 per year requires a total investment portfolio of $1.5 million. This is your target if you assume zero Social Security, zero outside income sources, zero flexibility when it comes to spending. A clean and simple $1.5 million. But here's where things get interesting. Most households do receive Social Security, and that dramatically changes the math. The average benefit for 2 people is actually pretty substantial, at about $48,000 per year. So if Social Security covers roughly $48,000 per year, you only need your investments to produce the remaining $12,000. At a 4% withdrawal rate, that requires a portfolio of only $300,000. So now you have 2 radically different scenarios. With no Social Security, $1.5 million needed. With Social Security, $300,000 needed. That $1.2 million gap is exactly why retirement numbers feel contradictory. Both answers can be correct. They're just based off different assumptions. Now let's see what you need to invest today to get there. For long-term growth, we'll use a 7% annual return after inflation. Historically, U.S. stocks have returned about 10% before inflation and around 7% after inflation, making this a realistic long-term assumption, not too high, not too low. There's no guaranteed future return, of course, but every retirement model, including the 4% rule itself, has to rely on historical market behavior to make reasonable forward-looking assumptions. You simply can't make this calculation without choosing a return estimate. Once you have a solid idea of the return rate and the required retirement amount, everything funnels into a simple question. How much do you need today for compounding alone to grow it into your retirement target? No monthly contributions, no adding a little later, just one lump sum left untouched. This is where the numbers get fascinating. Let's walk through the scenario where you're entirely self-funded and aiming for the full $1.5 million. If you have 40 years until retirement, you need about $100,000 today. 30 years until retirement, you need about $200,000 today. 20 years until retirement, you need about $390,000 today. Every decade you delay almost doubles the required amount. That's the price of giving compounding less time to work. And let's be honest, this is where a lot of people say, yeah, but who has a lump sum like that just lying around? That reaction makes perfect sense. Almost nobody does. But this scenario isn't meant to represent how real people usually invest. It's meant to answer one very specific question. What is the absolute minimum you'd need today if you wanted compounding to do 100% of the work for you and you never contributed again? It's a clean baseline, a way to isolate the pure power of time without muddying it with ongoing deposits and millions of variables. Real life is different though, often just the opposite. Most people invest gradually, paycheck by paycheck, increasing their amounts as they get worried about actually being able to retire, which is a completely separate scenario and requires far less upfront money. But to understand the raw math of compounding, the lump sum version is the cleanest way to see what time alone can accomplish. Many people hesitate to rely on Social Security, and it's understandable. For decades, fixing or cutting the program has been tossed around as a political talking point, and it makes people uneasy. It's estimated that 12 to 15% of older Americans rely on Social Security as their only income source, with others relying on it heavily. But here's the reality. If Social Security ever collapsed entirely, the economic fallout would be so severe that worrying about your personal retirement account would be the least of your problems. No retirement plan, no matter how disciplined, would function normally in that kind of environment. It's absolutely sensible to be cautious when planning for the future, knowing that the future might not be the same as the past, but it's just as sensible to factor Social Security into the math unless you have a concrete reason to leave it out. Building a retirement plan requires a balance of realism and optimism. If you are completely pessimistic about the future economy, you're going to find it hard to invest at all, right? Returns might not be as good going forward, but they could also be much better than you'd expect. So once you do include it, your personal savings target drops dramatically to about $300,000. If you have 40 years until retirement, you need about $20,000 today. 30 years until retirement, you need about $40,000 today. 20 years until retirement, you need about $78,000 today. These numbers look almost unreal compared to the earlier scenario, but that's the impact of Social Security covering most of your income needs. This huge contrast is why many people get confused when experts give totally different retirement targets. The targets aren't conflicting, they're just based on different assumptions. Now here's the part most people miss. You don't have to have that full amount sitting around right now. These are the never add another dollar numbers, but real life doesn't work that way. Most people start with something small and build gradually, adding a little at a time. And once you introduce ongoing contributions, the required starting amount shrinks dramatically. That's an entirely different and much more achievable scenario. The reason why we're isolating the lump sum version is because it shows you the pure baseline, the absolute minimum needed today if compounding alone has to do every bit of the work. When you add real-world contributions, you're stacking another growth engine on top of compounding, and the results multiply. Compounding doesn't reward the person who invests the most, it rewards the person who invests the earliest. Two people can put in drastically different totals and still end up in similar places, simply because one gave their money more time to grow. Imagine two investors. The early starter invests $100,000 once and never adds another dollar. The late starter invests $300,000 but begins 15 years later. They could end up with a similar amount at retirement, even though one invested 3 times the money. That's the power and the penalty of time. But the biggest takeaway is this. You can get incredible results even if you start small, as long as you start early. If you're in your 20s, even $20,000 or $30,000 invested at some point can snowball into a retirement fund that does most of the work for you. That's like maxing out a Roth IRA for just 3 or 4 years. If you're in your 30s or 40s, the required lump sum is higher, but still doesn't have to be anywhere near the multi-million-dollar targets people panic about online. And if you're starting even later, knowing your target gives you clarity. You can choose to save more aggressively, adjust expectations, lean on Social Security, or slightly delay retirement. The point isn't to overwhelm you, it's to give you a clear, realistic roadmap. So what's the lowest amount you need today to let compounding work entirely on its own? There's no single universal number. It depends on 2 things. Number 1, whether Social Security is part of your retirement plan, and number 2, how many years you have left until retirement. With Social Security, the lowest amount might be as little as $20,000 today. Without Social Security, it might be closer to $100,000 today. Either way, the message is simple. The earlier you begin, the less you need today, and the more compounding carries the load. In the end, starting early doesn't just save you money, it buys you options, freedom, and peace of mind. And that's the real magic of compounding. It turns your time into your greatest financial asset.